Hello my beautiful boring people, welcome back to my channel. I don't know what day I'm on anymore because I kind of lost track. I've been really sick the past 2-ish weeks. Whenever I basically stopped filming, I started having a lot of problems with headaches and dizziness and shortness of breath and being really lethargic. There have been like 3 good days, one of which thankfully was the 4th of July, so I did get to go hang out with my friends. But it's just been really difficult because I haven't really been able to particularly do much. All of my chores are way off schedule, but I'm getting caught up on them, and that's okay, because at least the past couple days I've been able to do stuff in the morning before the nap attack hits me. Oh, that's something else that's weird. I've never been much of a person for naps. Like, even as a child, I hated them. And now, sometime between like 12 and 2, I get so lethargic that my internal temperature control is just gone. And I get either really hot or really cold. And the only thing that solves it is sleep. So, that's a thing. Don't really know why, but yeah, just gotta deal with it, I guess. I'm not sure if I'm going to continue the day numbering system. I feel like I should, but I also feel like I need a complete reboot at this point, because some of the stuff that I was doing, I do like and I do want to keep because it did keep me somewhat motivated. But some of the stuff, even though it's only 10 minutes of yoga in the morning, it's not my jam. I don't look forward to it, and I did it for like 100 days, and it should only take a few weeks to form a habit. It doesn't bring me joy, and I kind of want to KonMari my life right now and do things that I really do enjoy when I can, because right now I have less amount of time to enjoy what I'm doing, so I feel like what I do should be really enjoyable, because I don't know what's going on with my body, but it's not very functional. So when I do have function, I want to really enjoy what I'm doing. On the plus side, since June 23rd, I have read 30 books, 16 of which have been manga, so don't be too overly impressed. Also, remember, I've been stuck in bed most of this time. So, like, I ran out of Netflix and Hulu and YouTube shows that I enjoyed watching, and I was getting really bored with TV, and I couldn't game because it was like giving me vertigo and stuff, which I already have problem with field of vision sliders not being large enough, and that really messing with me. So I turned to books, and I've been reading a lot of stuff suggested by Starla Reads and a couple of other friends, and I'm not exactly a book reviewer, but I'm going to try to give you a very brief overview of what I've read, because that's the only thing I really have to report on since I've been gone, so I hope you like it. If this is how I'm able to function in future, where most of my time is spent reading in bed and napping, until I get whatever this is figured out, please do leave me comments below of how to improve my book reviews, because that seems to be one of the few things I can do right now. So I guess I'm gonna run with it until I don't, or something. I'm not very eloquent, but I'll try my best, and please do leave constructive criticism. I started out by reading 1,000 Beginnings and Endings by Ellen O, and well, actually it's by a bunch of different authors, but that's the main one if you're gonna look this book up. It's an anthology of Asian folktales from like all over Asia, South Asia, Central, any of the islands just about that you can think of. Like, they went pretty wide scale with how they were pulling different sections of Asian folklore, but they were reimagined folklore. In some cases it worked, but in a lot of cases, at the end of the short story, it'll have a synopsis of the original story and how the writer adapted it, and I actually preferred that to a lot of the short stories, so I think I just would have preferred an anthology of the original tales rather than covers of them, but you know, whatever. I gave it 2.5 stars. There were probably 2 folk tales out of all of them in there that I really enjoyed, and the rest, it just wasn't my jam. The next thing I read was With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I gave it 5 stars. It was so good and so interesting to see how this was written from such a different viewpoint than what I would experience as, you know, a married lady in my mid-20s that's white and has the privilege of being able to be a stay-at-home wife. Even though we're on a pretty tight budget, we're still able to do that, and I'm very lucky to have that. But it shows a story about Imani, this mixed-race, hard-working teenage mother who's in her senior year of high school and really enjoys cooking, and she lives with her grandmother, and she's trying to kick butt and figure out her life and do the best that she can to provide for her family. And we follow her work life and school balance and how she gets to go on this school trip to Spain at the end of the year with her cooking class, and how meeting different people because of that cooking class, how that impacted her life. And we're exposed to a bunch of different societal structures on how people perceive each other based on race, wealth, schooling, and work ethic. And my review of this book may sound a bit boring, but trust me, it's totally worth the read. It's so interesting. The next book I read was The Abyss Surrounds Us by Emily Skrutsky, and I gave it 3 stars. This book was okay. The second book in this duology was much better, but you do need information from the first book in order to understand the second, which makes sense because it's a duology. Basically, if there was a Cliff Notes version of this book, then I'd recommend reading it, because there's a bunch of fluff in the story, and there were some parts of it that were just drawn out for too long, that weren't that interesting, and it wasn't really providing much to strengthen the character or the story. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess that's okay, but what does this have to do with driving the story forward? Because it was okay. It did grab my attention in the very beginning and at the very end, so it's just a lot of the middle was convoluted. I do appreciate that there is a lesbian love story, but it's got kind of a Stockholm Syndrome feel to it, which is mentioned in the book. The author was very aware of it while writing the story, but I mean, it was okay. There was a decent twist in it that wasn't completely predictable, so that's good. I would recommend reading this book just so you can read the second one. The next thing that I read was all of Tokyo Ghoul, so volumes 1 through 14 by Sui Ishida. Don't crucify me for my lack of being able to pronounce things, please. I'm trying. I gave it 4.75 stars for the entire series. It was very interesting. You follow the life of Ken Kaneki, and he was originally a human, but then he got into an accident, and now he's a half ghoul, doing half ghoul things and trying to figure out how to get ghouls and humans to stop needlessly killing each other and stuff like that. And there's a lot of suspense to the story and some really good character development. Very interesting read. Art style's pretty cool. Sometimes the fight scenes can be a little bit hard to follow with what's going on, but it's also been adapted to an anime, and the anime is pretty good too. The second season stops following the manga to a degree, so you do get some surprises by watching the anime as well. But if you like anime and suspense and weird things about ghouls and stuff, I'd highly recommend the read. Next, I read The Edge of the Abyss by Emily Skrutsky, which is the second part of the duology to The Abyss Surrounds Us. It's so much better. In my opinion, I think Skrutsky should have taken the first book and condensed it down to like a third of what was written and then just tacked it on to The Edge of the Abyss, and it would have been a much better book overall. But in this book, you follow Cassandra Lung and why she decided to stay with the pirate ships, because she's trying to right the wrongful deeds of, you know, what was going on in the first book, which you can't say in this review because I don't want to give away any spoilers. But anyways, she's trying to right the wrongs of what happened in the first book and is trying to do that from the other side of the fence from what she was trained to do in the first book. So there you go. It did amaze me how much Emily improved her writing from her first book ever to her second book, and now she has another book that is out called Hull Metal Girls, and I do want to read that one because if her work keeps improving at the rate that it has from book to book, I expect that Hull Metal Girls will be very good. So I am excited to read that. So the next book I read was House of Furies by Madeline Rowe, and I gave it 4 stars. It's a gothic horror, but it doesn't focus necessarily on blood and gore and specifically what's happening. Like, that's definitely a driver with what is going on in the story, but you don't focus on the nitty-gritty gross details of it. It's more of an overarching theme through this book. And it's difficult to try to talk about this without giving away any spoilers, but basically you follow the main character through her process of discovering that she is part of the paranormal community. And it's a really good read. I highly recommend it. The only reason I didn't give it 5 stars is because the plot was somewhat predictable. I wasn't able to predict everything that was going to happen in the book as I was reading it, but I definitely had a pretty good lock on what was happening ahead of time. If there had been like a couple more twists and turns, then I probably would have given it 5 stars. The next book I read was City of Ghosts by Victoria Schwab, and if I was a middle school kid, which is who this book is aimed at, I totally would have given it 5 stars, but because I'm not a middle schooler, I gave it 4 stars because it's semi-predictable, but that doesn't mean I can't enjoy it, because if you've ever watched the show Ghost Whisperer, it will give you heavy vibes for that show, but with a cute little twist on it, with more friendliness to it, but there's still adventure to be had and scary ghosties in the background. It's really fun. It's compelling, but not that complex. But it is a thoroughly fun short read. Next thing I read was Tokyo Ghoul RE or Re, depending on, you know, how you want to interpret the ... RE. Volumes 1 and 2. I probably would have read the whole series if the person having volume 3 would just please return it to my local library, because that's how I'm reading all of my books. I check them out from the library, and someone is over a week overdue with them, and that bothers me. But anyways, so far I'm giving the second part of the Tokyo Ghoul series 3.8 stars, because we're following Kaneki through a different part of his life, which is very much based off of how the previous series ended, but the new part of the story I'm not as interested in. Maybe it's just because I'm not, 5 volumes deep into the series yet, but it's not as catching to me as the first series was, so I am looking forward to reading this more, because I have a feeling that as I get more and more into it, I'm going to enjoy it more. It just didn't pick up exactly where I thought it would, and I'm disappointed because I really liked that first storyline. It is Well written, though, and I mean, the art's still on par because, it's a manga and stuff. I haven't watched the anime for season 3, which follows the RE storyline, because I want to read the manga first before I watch it. So there you go. The next book I finished, I didn't read it all in one day, was The Shadow Rising by Robert Jordan, which is the 4th book in the Wheel of Time series. I'm giving The Shadow Rising 5 stars. I can't really give a review for what happened in it very well. I might once I go back and reread these books, because I'll probably want to do a more nitty-gritty detail examination of it once I have the full picture. But basically, this series has been one where if it wasn't for my husband saying, I know the first book's rough to get through because he's doing a crap ton of world dev, but once you get through the world dev, the story's actually really good, and there are so many details of what's going on. It's more detailed than a Tolkien story. Way more detailed. But he's also very good at following his own lore and keeping up with it and develop, each little bitty detail in this series is important, and it will come back later. So you have to pay attention while you're reading the series. But oh my god, once you get past the first book, the second one gets better. The third one has you on the edge of your seat. The fourth one has you on the edge of your seat the whole time. It's a really fun story to follow. So I'm just going to leave that as that. The next book I read was The Three Body Problem by Cixin Liu? I don't know how to say the name. And I can't read Chinese because the characters and their tonation things in Chinese, and I'm afraid to even try to say it because I could end up saying something else that I didn't mean if I did try to do the intonation properly. So, ta-da! Anyways, The Three Body Problem was a little bit difficult for me to follow as a Western reader because it's very, very much steeped in the cultural, I wouldn't say ideals. You have to have cultural background for what was happening in China from the 1960s to the 1990s in order to fully appreciate what was going on, because it relies heavily on the reader knowing details about the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And if you don't know those details, then you won't quite understand the depth of what's going on, because the book itself doesn't stand alone from that cultural piece. It isn't developed in its own world where that is explained. You very much have to already know that. That being said, it's really interesting how the translator, because this was a book originally written in Chinese then translated into English, the translator did do a very good job at leaving footnotes at the bottom of the pages where there were heavy cultural references or things that the reader just would not pick up in a cultural translation. And he does a pretty good job of explaining how, that works, which I greatly appreciated. Another thing that I had a problem with, and maybe this is a Western thing, I've always been taught a good story shows and doesn't tell. But in this book, with the exception of a couple of places, is mostly tell and not show, which is not my favorite. You feel like you're being lectured at rather than joining the character for the story. And it feels like the story's being pushed at you, and it's not that fun. In Starla's review of this book, she said it felt like, you're in a video game and you're talking to a character that's just purely there to give you information and is not really part of the story, and that's very much a good analogy for what's going on in this book. But that being said, the end of the book was very interesting. How, it's true science fiction. It's very much based in science, but with a twist to see what could happen if XYZ, which you'll have to find out by reading the book. But it's a very interesting twist on physics, which was really cool to see, and also kind of difficult to follow because it's theoretical physics and I don't have a background in that. But it was still very interesting. The first 300 pages of the read, not that great. The last 100, pretty good. But from what I've read on the Goodreads reviews, it sounds like the three-body problem is the weakest of the trilogy. Or I think I saw that there was also a 4-box set for this too. So I don't know whether it's a trilogy or a quadrology. I might be making up words right now. Anyways, the last 100 pages of the book were worth the read just because it was so unique. And I would like to give The Dark Forest, which is the sequel to this, a try, just because I've heard that The Dark Forest is supposed to be infinitely times better than the three-body problem. The next books I read were Vicious and Vengeful by V.E. Schwab, which were fantastic. I cannot give these books enough good words. 5 stars all the way for both of them. They were so interesting. The way that this book is written is, I don't know if convergent timelines is the right wording I'm looking for here, but basically you're looking at the past and the near past, and you go through your character development by jumping backwards and forwards in the story, and as you get closer and closer to the end of the novels, all of those pieces converge onto the single point in time in which you finish the book, which was really interesting. Vengeful was a little bit more difficult to follow in the first part because there was so much character development happening for so many different characters. Vicious was much easier to follow because it really followed 2 characters with some auxiliary ones thrown in towards the end, whereas Vengeful did a pretty good amount of character development for like 5-ish characters at the same time, still following the main 2 or 3, but you're getting pretty good background for everyone that's going on in Vengeful. So it was a little bit difficult to follow at first, but by part 3, everything's making sense, and by the end of the book, it blows your mind. So, I highly recommend those. The next books I read were Court of Shadows and Tomb of Ancients by Madeline Rowe, which are the next installments in the House of Furies series, and I gave them both 4 stars as well. I do think that they were a little bit better than the first book, but again, it wasn't so complex that I couldn't predict what was going to happen in them. It's still a gothic horror series that doesn't ruminate on how the deaths happen. They more acknowledge that death is happening and these weird things in the world are happening because of these godlike figures. And the last book gets really interesting because you get to learn how the gods came to be and what impact that they had. It's a really cool storyline. So if you like something that would have, a little bit of a morbid curiosity to it, but still, not focus on gory detail, highly recommend the series. So the next 2 books that I've been reading have been The Girl at Midnight and The Shadow Hour by Melissa Gray, and I actually just started The Savage Dawn today, but I'm not far enough into that story to feel comfortable talking about it. I gave The Girl at Midnight 3 stars and The Shadow Hour 3.5 stars because, I'm probably not the target audience for this book. It's about a protagonist who was taken in at a young age by these magical bird creatures who are essentially at war with these magical lizard people. And, the human world is overarching, but the human world doesn't know anything about the magical world and the magical world's happenings, which is kind of interesting to follow. But there are overarching love stories that are involved heavily in the progression of the books, which just weren't doing it for me. I don't know, maybe I just don't really like this kind of romance thrown in with a fictional world, because I really like fictional worlds. It's just that I don't particularly love the romance that's being thrown in with it. The Shadow Hour was definitely much more interesting to me because you follow more of what's going on in the world and the lore behind it and how the lore came to be, and you start to get a feeling for, you know, what's actually up. But the Savage Dawn, I'm hoping, will be even better, because at that point we have a good chunk of the world established and a good chunk of the love triangles established, so I'm hoping that this one will be a lot more heavily focused on the lore. But we'll see. Do I think they're worth the read? Maybe. Like, it definitely helps if you have the audiobook and set it to ×2 speed. Like, I probably wouldn't have gotten through the first one without that, but if I was in the mood for a romance, and at that, a cheesy romance, I could probably read it, but we'll see. It just depends on what you like. Right now, I'm not super thriving on romances, so it's not quite cutting it for me. But that's my update on what I've been doing lately, because I've been stuck in bed. Been reading a lot of books, and I'm not very good at summarizing them, but hopefully you liked it, because this is all I got for you right now. Okay, bye!